All right, so this is the final part of this video, folks. So I call it the ugly, part of the good, the bad, the ugly, right? This mainly, I just want to say is like it's just the conflict. So this is I want to go through all the conflict that Ross and Rachel have throughout their relationship. So it's a couple of scenes, right, and a couple of good and bad sort of things. So let's go through the good first. The good conflict, it's ridiculous, but I did like the way that they got through uh, the hands on the butt thing. So like Ross and Rachel like kissing for the first time, like they're making out, and she starts laughing, and so then she's like, "Okay, I'm sorry," and she starts laughing again, and so then he feels uncomfortable, and then so you see him, again, be a little vulnerable and say, "Hey, like I'm sorry, I just I'm feeling self conscious right now." And she goes, "Oh, come on, like just, like so she uses like some humor as like, oh, just how about you just back up into my hands, or whatever. Like, come on, just grab my ass or whatever." So yeah, I think it's funny, and I think it's like she tries to make a kind of awkward situation better. So I like that a little bit. It's not too deep, but I thought that was funny. This one, I don't know if this really. I mean, it's conflict, but it's more funny. It doesn't really. It's not really resolved. I mean, Ross resolves it with Monica, but they're arguing over the TV, and and here, I'll just play the clip.
Quit it!
Bite me! Oh my god!
Well, Monica keeps changing the channel.
Oh, that's great. Why don't you tell Mommy on me? Now I'm Mommy in this little play? All right, look, I refuse to get sucked into this, like, weird little Geller dimension thing, okay? So I'm gonna go and take a nice, long, hot bubble bath because you kids are driving me crazy!
But yeah, basically, Rachel calls herself a mom. Like, you kids are driving me crazy. I thought that was funny. Okay, we will get to the fight with Ross and Rachel later. But I wanted to first talk about a couple of good conflict that they have. That it's two scenes in particular. All right, so the first one is actually, I'm sorry, there are three. So the first one is with Paolo. It's not with Paolo, but it's basically where they're talking about sex. So Ross is asking about sex. It's the dreaded question. I mean, it's always asked, but you shouldn't ask it. You can't talk about sex when you're in a relationship, like with previous partners, right? Like it's just you don't need to know. It just doesn't matter because all it's going to do is just make you mad. And there's rarely do you have that conversation. You're like, oh, this was great. I really learned a lot. I don't know. Like unless you can handle it, I tend to stay away from it. But anyway, so she says something along the lines of, it was animal sex. Like it was just pure, we didn't, I didn't really like Paul. All it was this animal sex, which, sends Ross off and he just like loses his shit. And it's so funny. I mean, look at this clip. Like he's losing his mind. He's just like, clicking the light. He's just like pulling the rope on the light over and over. I'm like, what are you doing? This is what you do when you feel anxious. Is just turn the light on and off. And he's feeling all insecure. He's like, oh, knock knock. Like I just thought that was super funny. But so this it's a good example of conflict because at first he's feeling all insecure and whatever. And then she goes over to him and assures him and says, hey, like, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. So she's not lying. But she's like, yeah, it was good with Paulo. But, like, you and I have something more special. Like, we have intimacy. We have closeness. You make me laugh. You're the full package. And so, this was a really, good moment for them where, it's so painfully evident that Ross is just so anxiously attached and insecure. Because I think to everybody, or at least is what it seems. I think David Schwimmer is an attractive guy, but the kind of unspoken understanding is that Rachel is out of Ross's league, and so that's kind of what it seems like. And so he feels that insecurity, knowing like, damn, like my girlfriend's hotter than I am, and so it kind of comes out, right? It just comes out in these little ways. So I think her reassuring him, she just has to reassure him a lot. And I think she does a good job. And he also takes it well and feels confident enough, and he like says, until now, and like flips her over, and they eventually have sex. It was a really good bonding moment where they address the insecurity. She reassures him, and then they get over it and they have a good rest of the night, right? So that to me was like a good moment of conflict where she laid it out on the table like, hey, like I love you, and I find you attractive in this way. And so you never really hear anything about sex ever after that. The second scene is where Ross has a event, and it's the episode's called "The One Where No One's Ready," right? So he has this huge event. He needs to be there. He wants his friends there to support him, but no one is ready. I just want to say this for the record. I mean, as someone who there's plenty of times that I'll be late. I've been late plenty of times, like for hangouts. Like I'm notorious. I try not to be too late though. I try to be at least like under 15 minutes late. Like I don't. Seldomly am I ever later than that. Especially if it's within town. Like if I'm driving somewhere like LA or something, like I'm at the mercy of traffic. But if it's hanging out with someone local, I try to be there within 15 minutes. But that said, if it was like something really important, like I'm getting dressed up and it's a big event, like I'm there on time. And so to me, it was a little disrespectful that the friends and also especially Rachel wasn't ready on time for Ross's event. Because it's really important. Like, and I don't know. I thought it was bad form on Rachel's part to not be ready. And also Ross, like he flipped the fuck out. Like he just flipped out. And so I think that Ross definitely needed to self-soothe in that moment. He definitely needed to go in the other room and just calm down. But he didn't utilize those tools, so he just is freaking out the whole time. But Rachel, should have been ready. I think she should have been ready off the get, period. Because like she knows that this is an important day to Ross. Even if she wasn't ready, I think that it's obviously it's Ross's job to like be cognizant and realize, be self-aware of where he's at, and to be like, okay, like I'm freaking out. I need to take myself out of the situation. We always teach this. We're always taught this thing called the stop method, right? Like stop, take a breath, observe your feelings, and then proceed accordingly. So he could definitely have done some breath work or whatever, but he doesn't. And so Rachel, people can see this, and Rachel also can see this. I thought that was a good opportunity for her to maybe pull him aside. So, she sees he's freaking out. She could have pulled him aside, like, hey, can we talk in my room real quick? And then they talk, and she says something along the lines of, like, hey, I can see you're really stressed out right now. I know you're anxious. I know you want to be on time. I know this event's really important to you. I want to be here for you. I want to make sure you feel supported and appreciated. I'm getting ready right now. I know I'm not ready exactly right now, and I'm sorry for that, but I need you to please be patient with me and be patient with the rest of the friends and know that we will be on time. Can you do that? Or, and I'm here for you if you need to talk, but I'm going to try and get ready myself. I want you to understand that I want to look my best for you, and I want to make sure that I can be there in my best form. So if they had that, like, how long did that take? That was maybe a little, like, 1 minute little thing, right? That would have saved the whole rest of the episode, right? But that's not why it happened. It's entertainment. So that doesn't happen. They don't have that conversation, and he just spirals to the point where he, yells at her and does something bad and yells at her and embarrasses her and calls her out in front of everybody, throws her shoes, which was uncalled for, and says, I don't care what you're wearing, just get your butt in there. And so, he acts disrespectful. And so because of that disrespect, Rachel then decides, I'm not going to go. Which definitely within her right? She feels disrespected. He didn't apologize. He didn't talk to her in a respectful, calm tone. And so, yeah, she's like, I don't need to go, actually. So he then goes back and tries to apologize, and he's like, "Hey, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't mean to yell." And she's like, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's not okay." But she's pretending it is. He's like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna go. This isn't like one of me abandoning you things, right?" And so then everything's not okay, but he just has to get on because none of the other people are ready. And then it's just a comedy of errors. Everyone's freaking out, right? So then he gets back to her. Was like, "How can I get you to go? I really want you here. I'm really sorry. I messed up." So he apologizes. He realizes that he messed up and wants to atone for atone for his sins, right? And which I thought was good. I'm like, okay, you recognize that you fucked up within a relatively short time, mind you. And he actively is like, "Hey, what can I do to get you to come with me?" And then Joey goes, "Oh, well, you could drink the fat." And he's like, "All right, that's what it takes." Then he's like legitimately about to drink a glass of pure fat, which is wild. Like, I don't know if I would have done that, but Rachel loves these like kind of outlandish little things that Ross does. Like she likes these little gestures, clearly. And so she's like, "Oh my God, you're gonna drink the fat." And then they hug and they make up, and then she comes and she looks, obviously stunning, and they go out, whatever. So, it was bad at first, but then it got good, because he put his pride aside and apologized and showed that he cares. So, I thought that was a bad then good conflict, right? Just like the first one. The second one, or the third one, excuse me, is the scene with Ben, like I mentioned earlier with the football. So Ross, again, we don't know what conversations they've necessarily had, but it sounds like this is the first time they've had this conversation of the future. And he says, "Oh, well, when we have babies," and it's like, whoa, bro, you can't be bringing that up if you haven't talked about it, right? Just so, nonchalantly, as if it's it's a guarantee. And so he does that, and it freaks her out. And so she, freaks out because she feels like her autonomy, her independence has been threatened. So that's a huge theme for her in her life that Ross should have been more mindful of. Is that Rachel, when she was with Barry, had no freedom. She was, basically a housewife. It was going to be bred to be that, and didn't have a life. She had nothing. She had no independence. And so when Ross says, "Oh, well, we're going to move to, Manchester County or whatever," it freaks her out because she, sends her into that, triggers those past memories, sent her into the fight or flight, and she flew. She left. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I need to leave."
Wow, that's great. Great.
So she leaves, right?
Okay, wow,
And like Ross, doesn't understand why did that happen, right?
take this.
And so then he goes after her after she freaks out about like, "Oh, well, like
Look at that.
we have the, you just planned our whole rest of our lives together, right?"
Maybe I've got one at home. Scarsdale. Hey, is that
And so, another bad thing happens when he comes in the door.
me too.
So you see that your partner ran out. She just ran out. That's not normal. People don't normally do that.
You know what? I think I'm gonna go to my room and read
To me, Ross, again, like I said, should have been more cognizant of 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 her past trauma. Maybe I shouldn't like say this because she has had a bad history with like babies and settling down, and like maybe we should have a more serious conversation instead of just saying something offhand, right? Get her in the right headspace before we talk about such things. Not assume that she's on the same page, because that wasn't a conversation they've had. So he incorrectly assumed. And so, the way he comes back in, you hear it. He says, "What the hell was that?" That is not the right way to start that conversation. I know he was upset. I know that Rachel leaves very suddenly, and that might have caught Ross off guard, but that does not warrant him swearing, number one, but also coming in and being so flippant. He should have recognized, oh yeah, like this might be affecting her a lot. So let me come in, so if Ross were to change his behavior, he should have come in, been a lot more gentle, said, "Hey, I'm sorry if I brought something up that might have, upset you. Can we talk about this? Are you in a space to talk about this?" And then you talk about it. instead of what the hell was that? Like, oh, you so offended me. Like, that's not right. So, yeah, and that way, you know, Ross messed up. Should have been better. So there's that. Let's see what else. Yeah, so then they talk about it, and Rachel. And so when he says, "What the hell was that?" It increases and encourages and proliferates. What do you want to say? It sets the table for a very high pitched, very like animated, energy filled conversation, which didn't need to be that high energy. You know, I always say, like, you know, like the whole stop method, just like take a breath, like calm down. So if Ross was heightened and Rachel's heightened, they didn't need to have a conversation right then. They could have waited a little bit, you know, a couple hours or whatever, cool off, letting cooler heads prevail. So you know, chill, and then come back and say, hey, earlier, like, you know, I could see you were a little upset. Can we talk about this? And obviously, you know, it leads to the comedic effect where they're both shouting at each other and say, well, I love you. Well, that's the first time we've said that. You know, so that's how they say I love you, is by yelling at each other, like mid-fight, essentially. And, you know, it's funny, but, like, you know, their I love you could have been a lot more meaningful and, like, you know, sensitive and sensual and all that, and it wasn't. So, you know, I like that they both, at least in this conflict, were able to get their thoughts out. They were able to talk about their feelings. You know, so they got it all out. Was it necessarily in the right tone? Probably not. But she said, I don't want my life decided for me. I had that already, and I need you to realize that. And he's like, okay, I will. And then he's like, but I'm not done. And she's like, oh, okay. And then he says, well, I need you to understand this is my perspective. And she's like, okay, I will. So the content is good in that exchange. She says what she needs. He says what he needs. They both agree to give that to each other. And then they say, I love you. But the way they did it obviously could have been a little bit better. So that's why I say it's, you know, it's good conflict, right? Then there's the rest two, which involves Mark. I'll get to the fight and the breakup in a sec, but let's go first to the initial fight with the lecture, right? So, you know, Mark leaves the job, which, you know, Ross then says, oh, too bad. It's like, dude, come on, get a grip, man. Like, you know, this is Rachel's friend. You may not like him, but at least be respectful. Be like, oh, sorry to hear that. Like, you know, good luck in your next job. Whatever. And, you know, instead of addressing, because that's the issue a lot of people have with Ross, is that he's so passive aggressive. He's not direct. It pisses me off personally. The way he'll just be like, hee hee hee. I just was thinking of something so funny you said. And that obviously pisses Rachel off. So that's why she goes, oh, well, I don't know. You thought this was funny. Anyway. So they have this conversation in bed where he says, I don't know why you need to go this thing with him. You didn't even ask me. And she's like, well, I didn't think you would like it. So, you know, there's two things. Number one, Ross feigns interest about going to this lecture because you see in the subsequent clips that he just sleeps through the entire lecture. So disrespectful. You know, he wants to claim that he's genuine in his interest, and then he's legitimately snoring and sleeping during the lecture. So he doesn't care. He doesn't care about supporting Rachel. I mean, he's there. He's like in the hall, but he's not there actively. He's not there interested, active. It doesn't make any sense for him to be there. He's bringing her down rather than lifting her up. And so that's lame, you know. And so she calls him on it, and she's 100% correct. It says, you were only there because you didn't want Mark to be there. And he's like, oh, no, that's not true, but it's 100% true. So, you know, I think that looking back, you know, you don't want to prove Monica right, that Ross was being disingenuous. What should have happened is that Rachel says, hey, I'm going to this lecture on Saturday. I was thinking of just going with Mark because he, you know, wants to go, but I also want to give a chance for you to come because I would appreciate you being there or whatever. And so,
And second of all,
you know, at least give Ross the chance. At least give him a chance to be a part of your life,
Okay,
especially if work was getting hard, right? And so she doesn't really give him that chance, which, you know, sucks. It's tough. But, you know, let's say she did, and then he acts, you know, disinterested. Then you know, the onus is on him, right? But because she invites Mark, then Ross only comes because of Mark. And so that's, you know, again, it leads to the conversation they have after where she says, like, you know, he says, and so this review again, it leads to vulnerability where Ross says, I feel like you're slipping away from me, which is, you know, a very vulnerable thing to say. And so, you know, he reveals, you know, the main point of this whole jealousy and everything is that we're not spending time together. I don't see you anymore. I feel like we're losing touch. And he, you know, kind of blames work for that, and part of it's true, and I think she kind of admits that. But she says something important, which is, you know, I'm sorry, but like, this is really important to me. I'm doing this work that I care about, that is my life, and it's for the first time I've ever felt important and needed, and like, you know, I'm achieving my dream, right? So where Ross fucks up is he says, you know, I mean, later he says it's just a job in the fight as well, but he doesn't understand her perspective. And I think that's like such a crux of their issue is that both of them, but especially Ross, like they don't understand each other's trauma. Like they don't really understand each other in the way that like Rachel had no independence. She had no chance to be who she is. And so you know, that's, yeah, I just think that if he'd been supportive, he should have been like, you know what, you're right. Your work is important. That's super support. I want to be here to support you. How can I do that better? And she says something along the lines of like, I want this to just be mine. And I think that's valid. You know, I think that every relationship needs some independence. Like you don't need to do everything together, right? Like Rachel's allowed to have her own shit. Just like paleontology is Ross's stuff. Now I think in the fight she says something like, you know, Professor Pit stains and like, you know, makes fun of Ross. She didn't need to go there. She didn't need to throw stones and all that. Like she didn't need to do that. That was unhealthy of her. She should not have done that. But you know, she was on the defensive. And you know, she was like, well, I supported you. I listened through here and you couldn't support me. That hurts. That would have been a healthier thing to say. And it's 100% true. You know, Rachel really calls him on it. But I think Ross needed to be more understanding of like, hey, Rachel's allowed to have her own life, but at the same time, you know, we need to have time for us. And so that kind of, you know, leads into the fight, leads into the breakup, which starts because Ross and Rachel aren't spending enough time together because of Rachel's job. And so we see it throughout. We see these little cracks and breaks where, you know, he says, you know, he goes to her office and was like, I haven't seen you in 2 weeks. You know, you've been working. I haven't seen you during the week for 2 weeks or something like that. For the record, I'm not a big fan of hanging out during the week. That's just me. But, you know, that's big for him, right? So, yeah, he feels, so there's the problem ahead. They're not spending enough quality time together. That's a legitimate issue. You know, that's a legitimate issue. But both things can be true. Rachel can have her job, and she can also spend time with Ross. So this is the crucial point that, like, this is what broke them up, is that they as a couple did not prevent the breakup. They could have prevented the breakup through conversation and working together on a solution. And the problem is we're not spending enough time together. Our connection's losing. And so, you know, Ross is coming at her instead of coming at the problem. And that's the whole thing. That's what, you know, is said a lot in couples therapy is, you know, it's not me versus you, it's us versus the problem. And they did not come at, you know, Ross didn't come at it that way. And also, Rachel didn't come at it that way either. They didn't come at it. They just came at each other. And, they should have discussed it. Like, okay, hey, I'm hearing you right now. I'm hearing that, I'm not spending, we're not spending enough time together, that you feel a little distant from me. Your feelings are valid. I totally hear you. And then she should have said something along the lines of, okay, so what should we do moving forward? How can we come up with a solution to where I still feel like I have my own independence and I can work and I can achieve my goals and also make sure that I'm spending enough time with you? And then Ross would say, oh, well, how about we carve out a time before bed where we call each other on the phone. Bam. Easy. You can do that. It can be done. Or, hey, maybe we can try and get lunch once a week. Or, hey, how about we, have an all-day Saturday hangout and we go on a trip somewhere. There are solutions to problems. But they, as far as we know, as far as we can see on the show, did not take that effort to do that. Now, who's to say that Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, Rachel's not hanging out with Ross and Ross is just insecure? We don't know. But as far as we know, it seems like Rachel agrees that they aren't spending enough time together. So I really think that could have been solved. I think that they could have figured out a solution. Like, okay, let's just only hang out on weekends. And then Ross would have to accept that and support her. Because that's what good partners do, right? So, because work's going to be hectic, but it's not going to be that way forever. And I still think there are ways that you can compromise and come to a balance and a solution where both parties get what they want. That's possible, but they didn't try. So that was their big mistake too, was that they did not try to find a solution. So anyway, that's how the lecture goes from good to bad, basically. Anyway, so let's our final clips we're going to break down is the fight, right? I'm not going to break down the whole were they on a break thing. I think that's for another pod or for another thing. But I think the fight, the episode where she says we need to take a break, it's the culmination of everything, right? So because they didn't get out in front of the whole quality time spent thing, Ross then takes drastic measures. He takes matters into his own hands, and it's their anniversary. So you want to talk about missing bids for connection. Gottman theory always talks about that. The biggest bid ever is your anniversary. Relationship milestones are massive. You want to talk about history? You remember those moments. So it's your anniversary. You're there. I mean, men are always criticized. Oh, you forgot our anniversary, blah, blah, blah. You didn't do anything. Ross had something planned. And Rachel says, I can't because of work. So you want to look at it one way. You might say, what the hell, Rachel? Like, why weren't you here? You put your job above us. That sucks. But in the grand scheme of life, this, I assume, was probably on a weekday because she's working. So, if I was Ross, I would say I would have moved it to Saturday. Or if I was Rachel, I would have been had the wherewithal to know, hey Ross, like I know we had plans on Wednesday, but I really, that's our anniversary date, but I really think we should move to Saturday, so that way we have our own time together. I don't have work, and we could spend all day together, whatever. That would have been a great solution. That would have been great. And then they wouldn't have had to worry about the whole work thing. Rachel wouldn't have had to choose. They could have just done it on Saturday or done it on Sunday, but they didn't, and that was a mistake. So the issue was, so he calls, and so Rachel has to bail, which sucks, and it's been a pattern, and so that's what really sets Ross off, is that it's been a pattern of bailing. And so that's kind of on Rachel a little bit. Rachel's allowed to have a busy job. But I think where it comes to the respect of the relationship is where she's bailing and continues to bail. Because she's not being respectful of his time and his energy. And, you could say sorry as much as you want. But if you continually bail and it's just a trend, like, you're going to lose trust. Ross, thinks, okay, this is a one-time thing, but then it happens repeatedly. How is he supposed to trust that Rachel is going to come through for him. How is he supposed to trust that, her word means anything? I don't mean to make a mountain out of a molehill, but that stuff matters. Like, showing up matters. And she hasn't been showing up, and her word means jack, and he's pissed. He's tired of it. And I understand. Now, where Ross messed up as well, so he calls, right? She flakes. And so he says, maybe I should come to you, because he really wants to spend time with her. He goes there against her wishes. She says, no, don't come. I'm too slammed. I don't have time. And so he comes anyway. And again, bro, you went against what she said, which I don't know why the hell he did that, but he thought, classic nice guy, right? Like, I can, I'll just do whatever I can, and she'll have to be okay with it, right? Like, I'll just magic this moment up, and she'll be happy. Or it'll work out because I mean it to work out. And it's like, no, this isn't going to work out tonight. You need to take the L. Just take the L and move on. But he didn't. And so he comes there and just brings this whole basket of shit and then starts a fire. And she's giving him this nonverbal cue of these eyes, hey, you shouldn't be here right now. You need to leave. Can you please? And she even says, you need to go. And brings in the coworker come on, Sophie, does she have some time? And which is lame. And then she snaps at him because he's disrespecting her space. And he says, don't snap at me, which she I don't know, it's you should talk to each other respectfully. But he holds his ground and says, hey, please don't talk to me like that. This is the most I've seen you in 2 weeks, which was true. He's staying it back. And then she reaffirms, hey, I don't have time to stop, and you just came. I need you to go. And so she throws him out, which, it's unfortunate it had to come to that. It shouldn't have come to that. And you feel bad for Ross, obviously, because, he went through all this effort to, make this night special. He was trying to make it special. You can't fault him for that necessarily, but he also should have just taken the L, He was trying to turn a no into a yes, and that was his issue. So, anyway, then they come back home, and then, the fight continues where she's like, I'll give you a chance to apologize to me. And he's like, for what? Letting you throw me out of your office? It was, no, you disrespected me. You came to my office after I told you not to. And anyway, so then the previous issues of, hey, we're not spending enough time together, come to a head. And this is where the fight happens, right? He says, I don't want to have a relationship with your answering machine, etc. And then he says it's just a job, and she freaks out even more. And then she's like, I don't know what to do. And again, and then she says, let's just take a break. Again, could have been avoided all along. Could have been avoided if they had a solution, right? And it also could have been avoided if Ross said, let's come up with a solution. Or, whatever. Just they were not in a good headspace. And so that's why. And so she's like, oh, that's we need to take a break. And so then Ross is like, okay, that's a good call. So he's like, oh, you're right. We're getting a little heated. Let's take a break from this and come back. That was a pretty good idea. And then she's like, no, a break from us. Which, again, I'm not going to argue the semantics of it, but to me that seems like a breakup. They didn't fully break up, though. He leaves. So he stonewalls her, essentially, and is like, I'm going to leave. He could have stayed and said, what does that mean? And kept going. That, and they could have talked something out, but by her not chasing after him, that's essentially a breakup in that moment. Eventually, he calls her later, goes to the bar. He's all sad. And then Mark comes over. And that's the issue as well. Like we said earlier, you can't prove the insecurity right. You basically have a fight with Ross, and then you allow Mark to come over. You're able to have boundaries with Ross kind of at work where you throw him out, but yet Mark, this seemingly threat to your relationship you allow to come over in this very vulnerable time. I guess she was vulnerable. Maybe she, wasn't thinking clearly, but to me, it's like that's also, a little bit disrespect. Like you allow this guy who may or may not have a crush on you to come over to your house when you're super vulnerable instead of your friends. You have plenty of girlfriends. You're not going to have them come over. You have this guy come over. And then Ross calls and was like, "Hey, we should. What? This is crazy. Blah blah blah." And she's like, "Yeah, you're right." And then Ross hears him in the background. Now Ross shouldn't have hung up and should have just come back over. He should have just come back over. But Mark shouldn't have been there. Period. Anyway, so then he says, "Okay, I get it," and then hangs up, and then sleeps with another woman. And he messed up. He shouldn't have done that. He should have gone to bed. Also, where the hell were Joey and Chandler? They should have taken him and been like, "Hey, you don't need to be at a bar right now. You need to be at home. You need to go to sleep." So multiple mistakes made there. But Ross should never have slept with her. I mean, he was drunk, but and then drunk is gonna, you're gonna have less inhibition. I get that, but like Rachel says, where are you trying to aim at? Her purse? So he messed up. He shouldn't have done that. But and being drunk is no excuse. People have. You have recollection of what happened, right? Like you have control. As much as you want to say you don't, you have some control. Excuse me. So anyway, just to quickly, recap. Everyone's seen the fight video, but one thing I will say is just, the fight is just so real. The way they're daggering at each other, and Ross says, "I can forgive. If you cheated on me, I can forgive you." But the way the most heartbreaking phrase from Rachel is, "You're a different person to me now," and it's true. And so I think that Ross messed up, and to me, I would never sleep with someone else if I was in love with someone. I could never do that. Like I could never even be with another woman. So you can't defend Ross and the fact that he says we're on a break and all that. It's hogwash. So sorry to make it so brief, but it's true. So anyway, overall, just there was a lot of chances that they both had to they didn't need to break up. Is what I'm trying to say. Ross, if Ross hadn't slept with her, I think they could have salvaged it. But that was the nail in the coffin. And I think that they both made their bed in terms of this one. They had chances to be better, to make the relationship work. They had so much, like I just said, there's so much evidence of them being a good couple. But because of this conflict and their inability to find a solution, they end up breaking up a good thing. So it's tough. But they eventually get back together and live happily ever after or whatever. But I hope that if folks are listening right now and they have this sort of thing, what I want to say is that magic, that chemistry, it doesn't come around all the time.
I did a terrible,
and
stupid thing.
I don't know. I think there's just so many couples out there that they're not preventative with these issues, and they ignore it. They don't try and solve it, and they get defensive, and it spirals. And so, if Ross and Rachel had figured this out from the jump, had come up with a solution when it was time to do that, they wouldn't have broken up. This all wouldn't have happened. The domino wouldn't have fallen. If Ross had figured out his insecurities, if Rachel and him had figured out a solution to spending more time together, I think they'd still be, they wouldn't have been on a break, right? So, yeah. Anyway, that's all the conflict I have. I think that, generally Rachel's pretty good when it comes to conflict about reassuring Ross. But I think when they're both heated, they can both say some pretty, harsh things and send jabs and be passive aggressive, and it's something that they both need to work on, for sure. But yeah, so Ross got a lot of work to do, but they both have things that they need to work on as a couple. So At any rate, that's the ugly. That's part 4, folks.